Look at that small white crystal on the table, that innocent sugar cube. The sweetness it leaves on your tongue brings comfort, doesn't it? Just a simple pleasure, an innocent reward. But 300 years ago, the blood spilled for this very white gold could have turned oceans red. In the scorching plantations of the 17th century, producing these sweet grains wasn't just a job, it was one of history's greatest tragedies. Sugar wasn't a food then, it was a colossal force connecting continents, financing wars, and sustaining empires. While kings locked it away in silver boxes to prevent theft, the sweat and blood poured in the smoky, merciless mills of the Caribbean was the hidden price of our sweet lives today. So how did a simple plant enslave humanity so completely? Why was a spoonful of sugar worth as much as a gold nugget? And why did these sweet crystals become the end of millions of lives? Today, we descend into the bitter truths behind that white brilliance. From the secret forests of India to the dark holds of slave ships, we'll discover how sugar fed empires and changed the world. This isn't just a story about sugar. This is the story of the bitter foundation upon which the modern world was built, crystal by crystal. But before the blood, before the chains, before the ships, there was wonder. It began in India. Thousands of years ago, in the lush river valleys of the subcontinent, farmers discovered something extraordinary, a tall, thick grass that bled sweetness when cut. They learned to crush its stalks, boil the juice, and slowly, patiently crystallize it into solid form, the world's first sugar. Pure, white, almost magical. For centuries, this knowledge stayed hidden within India's borders. Sugar was a precious secret, shared only along the most trusted trade routes, whispered between merchants like a formula for gold. Then came the Persians. When Emperor Darius led his armies into India around 510 BC, his soldiers encountered sugarcane for the first time. They stared in disbelief. One account describes their astonishment with words that echo through centuries. A reed that produces honey without the help of bees. No flowers, no hives, no insects, just a plant that defied all natural logic and produced sweetness from nothing but sun and soil. Darius brought the knowledge back to Persia. The Persians refined the production process, developing more sophisticated methods of crystallization. Sugar became a treasure of the Persian court, served only to royalty and powerful guests as a demonstration of wealth and refinement. But it was the expansion of Islam that truly transformed sugar from a regional curiosity into a global phenomenon. As Arab armies swept across Persia, Egypt, North Africa, and eventually Spain between the 7th and 10th centuries, they carried sugarcane like a conquering crop. Wherever the climate permitted, they planted it. The Mediterranean coastline slowly transformed, new plantations in Sicily, Cyprus, and southern Spain. Europe was about to taste something it had never known. And that first taste would trigger an obsession so powerful, so unpredictable, that it would eventually reshape every continent on Earth. But before the obsession came the exclusivity, because when sugar finally reached European tables, it didn't arrive as food, it arrived as something far more dangerous, a symbol of power.
In medieval Europe, sugar wasn't food, it was power made visible. When sugar first appeared on European tables around the 11th century, it arrived not in kitchens, but in apothecaries, pharmacies. Doctors prescribed it as medicine for digestive problems, chest pain, and fever. A substance this rare, this extraordinary, surely couldn't be merely eaten. It had to heal, it had to cure, it had to be worth the fortune it cost. And it was a fortune. A single pound of sugar in 13th century England cost the equivalent of several days of a laborer's wages. Ordinary people never tasted it, never touched it. They heard about it the way peasants heard about gold, as something belonging to another world entirely. Kings and aristocrats displayed sugar the way they displayed jewels. At royal banquets, elaborate sculptures carved entirely from sugar stood at the center of tables, not to be eaten, but to be admired. Castles, animals, mythological figures, all sculpted from this precious white substance, announced to every guest the extraordinary wealth of their host. Eating the sculpture would have been unthinkable. It was art. It was status. It was the most expensive decoration money could buy. And the theft concern was genuine and constant. Noble households stored their sugar in locked silver boxes called sugar chests, kept under the personal supervision of the lady of the house. Servants weren't trusted near it. Guests were given measured portions with deliberate ceremony. Every grain was counted, every serving recorded. Then everything changed. One man, one voyage, one island.
In 1493, Christopher Columbus carried sugarcane to the Caribbean on his second voyage to the Americas. He had seen sugar plantations in the Canary Islands and recognized immediately what the Caribbean's climate offered: something extraordinary. Volcanic soil of exceptional richness, rainfall at perfect intervals, heat that never relented, sunshine that lasted all year. It was, quite simply, paradise for sugarcane. The plants exploded in Caribbean soil with impossible abundance. What had taken months of careful cultivation in the Mediterranean produced here with breathtaking ease and speed. The yield was enormous. The quality was exceptional. European investors immediately understood what this meant. Sugar could stop being a luxury. It could become a commodity, available not just to kings, but to anyone who could afford it. The financial potential was staggering. Unpredictable fortunes waited for anyone willing to invest in Caribbean plantations. European merchants, nobles, and eventually entire governments poured money into establishing sugar operations across the islands. Cuba, Hispaniola, Barbados, Jamaica each became laboratories for the most profitable agricultural experiment in human history. But here is where the sweet story turns irreversibly dark. Because paradise for sugarcane required something no one wanted to calculate honestly: an enormous, relentless, almost inhuman amount of labor. Cutting cane was brutal work. Processing it was dangerous beyond imagination. And the investors who saw only profit were about to make a decision so monstrous that its consequences would echo for centuries. They decided human lives were part of the business model. It began slowly. Caribbean plantation owners first tried enslaving indigenous populations, but disease, exhaustion, and resistance decimated those communities within decades. Then they tried poor European laborers, convicts, and indentured servants. Still not enough. The work was too brutal, the demand too enormous, the profits too tempting to slow down. So they turned to Africa. What followed was the largest forced migration in human history. Between the 16th and 19th centuries, approximately 12 million African men, women, and children were torn from their homes, chained in the suffocating holds of slave ships, and transported across the Atlantic Ocean under conditions of deliberate brutality. They were not passengers, they were cargo, counted, measured, and valued purely by their capacity to produce sugar. The Middle Passage, that nightmarish crossing from Africa to the Americas, killed an estimated 2 million people before they ever reached the plantations. Ships were packed so tightly that enslaved people couldn't sit upright. Disease spread through the darkness like wildfire. Those who died were thrown overboard. Those who survived arrived broken in body, but somehow unbroken in spirit, because survival itself required extraordinary human devotion. And then the real horror began. Sugar plantations were not farms, they were machines that consumed human beings. The work never stopped, never softened, never showed mercy.
During harvest season, which could last 9 brutal months of the year, enslaved people worked from before sunrise until long after midnight. There was no rest, there was no weekend. There was only the cane, the blade, and the burning sun overhead. Cutting sugarcane was relentless physical destruction. The stalks were tall, dense, and razor-edged. The leaves sliced skin with every swing of the machete. Insects lived in thick clouds around the fields. Snakes hid in the undergrowth. Heat stroke claimed lives regularly. Workers collapsed and were forced upright again. The plantation master's calculation was simple and savage. Replacement was cheaper than care. But the fields were only the beginning of the suffering. The mills where cane was processed ran continuously during harvest. Giant grinding cylinders crushed the stalks to extract juice, powered by animals or enslaved people working in rotating shifts through the entire night. The noise was deafening. The heat was unbearable. The steam rose from enormous boiling vats like breath from the mouth of something monstrous. And the danger was everywhere. Exhausted workers, denied sleep for days, sometimes lost concentration near the grinding machinery. Fingers caught, then hands, then arms. Every Caribbean sugar mill kept an axe hanging nearby, not as a tool, but as a last resort, to amputate a limb before the machinery pulled an entire person through. This wasn't exceptional. This was standard procedure, a known, accepted feature of the industry. Sugar wasn't grown in soil, it was grown in suffering. Every white crystal that sweetened a European cup of tea carried within it the invisible weight of a life consumed. Yet the system didn't just survive, it expanded, because the profits were too extraordinary for conscience to compete with greed.
What European merchants created in the 17th century was the most efficient and most monstrous economic system the world had ever seen. They called it trade. History calls it the triangle trade, and at its heart, beating like a dark engine, was sugar. The triangle was elegant in its brutality. European ships, primarily British, French, and Portuguese, sailed first to West Africa carrying manufactured goods, weapons, textiles, alcohol, and metal tools. These were exchanged for enslaved African people, captured in raids or sold by competing kingdoms in transactions that destroyed entire communities from within. The ships then crossed the Atlantic, their human cargo chained below deck to Caribbean and American plantations. There, enslaved people were sold. The ships loaded with sugar, rum, tobacco, and cotton for the return voyage to Europe, where these goods were sold at enormous profit. 3 journeys, 3 continents, one unbreakable chain of exploitation. The numbers were staggering. By the mid-18th century, sugar represented the single most valuable commodity traded in the entire European market. The Caribbean island of Barbados, smaller than the English county of Rutland, generated more trade revenue for Britain than all of its North American colonies combined. A single successful sugar plantation could make its owner wealthy beyond imagination within a single generation. This wealth didn't stay in the Caribbean. It flooded back into Europe, specifically into Britain, and it funded something that would permanently alter human civilization, the Industrial Revolution. The banks that financed slave ships became the banks that financed factories. The merchants who traded human beings invested their profits in steam engines, textile mills, and iron foundries. Cities like Bristol and Liverpool, grown rich on sugar money, became centers of industrial innovation. The economic historian Eric Williams argued decades ago what many still resist accepting, that modern capitalism was built on the foundation of enslaved labor and sugar profits. And the British consumed it with devoted enthusiasm. When tea arrived in Britain in the 17th century, it transformed from a curiosity into a national obsession with remarkable speed. But tea alone wasn't the addiction. Tea with sugar was. The British working class, who could never have afforded sugar a century earlier, now stirred it into their cups with the casual ease of people who had forgotten what luxury once meant. By 1800, the average British person consumed roughly 8 kilograms of sugar annually. By 1850, that number had doubled. Tea breaks in factories, sweetened with Caribbean sugar produced by African hands, kept exhausted industrial workers functioning through 18-hour shifts. The energy of enslaved people, transformed into sugar, now powered the Industrial Revolution's workforce. Slavery fueled luxury. Luxury fueled industry. Industry fueled empire. The triangle was complete. And somewhere at each of its 3 corners stood the same small white crystal, innocent in appearance, devastating in consequence. But no system this monstrous could survive forever without someone finally asking the question that changed everything. How much sweetness is worth one human life?
The abolitionists who rose across Britain and America in the late 18th century answered that question with one word: nothing. No sweetness, no profit, no empire justified the systematic destruction of human beings. William Wilberforce argued in Parliament with trembling fury. Formerly enslaved writers like Olaudah Equiano published memoirs that forced comfortable Europeans to confront what their sugar actually cost. Quaker communities launched boycotts, refusing to buy Caribbean sugar, printing pamphlets with an image that haunts history still, a kneeling enslaved man in chains, asking simply, "Am I not a man and a brother?" Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807. Slavery itself ended in British colonies in 1833. Other nations followed, slowly, reluctantly, each dragging their feet as long as economic interest competed with moral conscience. But abolition didn't erase the damage. It couldn't. The plantation system had already accomplished something permanent. It had built the modern world. The wealth extracted from 2 centuries of enslaved labor had constructed the banks, the railways, the universities, and the industries that defined Western civilization's rise to global dominance. When slavery ended, the British government paid compensation totaling £20 million, an almost incomprehensible sum representing 40% of the national budget. They paid it not to the formerly enslaved people, not to the communities destroyed across Africa, but to the slave owners, compensating them for the loss of their human property. The enslaved received nothing. Their descendants inherited nothing but the aftermath. This debt was so enormous that British taxpayers continued paying it until 2015. Now look again at that sugar cube on your table.
Today, sugar is everywhere and costs almost nothing. It fills every processed food, every soft drink, every packaged snack in your kitchen. The average person now consumes roughly 40 kilograms annually, 5 times what a Victorian factory worker consumed. We no longer think about where it comes from or what it once demanded. But the invisible chains remain, transformed but unbroken. The sugarcane cutters of Brazil, the Philippines, and India today work in conditions that would be familiar to those 17th century plantation laborers. Brutal heat, physical destruction, wages that trap families in permanent poverty across generations. The geography of suffering has shifted, the exploitation hasn't. And within our own bodies, sugar has constructed new chains entirely. Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and metabolic disorders now represent the world's fastest-growing health crisis. The substance that once physically enslaved millions now creates a different kind of captivity, one measured not in iron shackles, but in hospital visits, in shortened lives, in bodies betrayed by an ingredient engineered to be irresistible. The sweet crystal on your table carries centuries of contradiction. It represents human ingenuity and human cruelty in equal measure. It built civilizations and destroyed communities simultaneously. So the next time you reach for sugar, pause for just one moment, not with guilt, but with awareness, because remembering the true cost of things is the only way we honor those who paid it. Taste the sweetness, remember the bitterness, and never, ever forget the difference.